Chapter 3 Moore's Dew. From her vantage point in the hills surrounding Reichdorf, Ravenna thought the view towards the south quite beautiful, and, for a moment, she could almost forget that the young men of her settlement had ridden there to war and death against the Greenskins. Below her, Reichdorf sat on the mud flats that spread from the river banks, squat and unlovely, but home nonetheless. The high wooden palisade wall looked bare without the usual complement of warriors, and Ravenna sent a prayer to the gods to look after all those who had ridden south. She shielded her eyes, looking for some sign of Reichdorf's warriors returning.
I can't see them, Geryon.
Turning towards her younger brother, who walked beside her on the rutted track that led from the cornfields around Reichdorf to its fortified gate.
I'm not surprised.
Shifting the leather sling that bound his broken wrist to his chest to a more comfortable position.
The forest is too thick. They could be almost home and you wouldn't see them.
They should be back by now.
Stopping to loosen her knotted headband and run a hand through her dark hair. Geryon paused with her.
I know. Remember, I should have been with them.
I know it was your time to ride to battle, but I'm glad you did not.
He met her gaze, and the anger she saw in his pale-skinned face surprised her.
You don't understand, Ravenna. They already make fun of me as it is. Now I've missed my first battle, and no matter how courageously I fight from this day on, they will always remember that I wasn't with them the first time.
You were injured. There was no way you could have fought.
I know that, but it will make no difference.
Trinovantes will not allow them to mock you.
So now I need my twin brother to look after me, is that it?
No, that's not what I meant.
Her brothers were dear to her, but where Trinovantes was quiet, thoughtful and reserved, Geryon was quick-witted, handsome and the terror of mothers with pretty daughters, but he could often be cruel. Like her, his hair was the colour of jet and worn long, as was the custom of the Umberrigen, and was his pride and joy. Only the previous week, Wulfgar had teased him about looking like a Bretonny Catamite. Such was the care he lavished on his appearance, and Geryon had attacked him in a fury. Geryon was no match for the older boy, and had ended up flat on his back, nursing a cracked wrist. Trinovantes had stopped Geryon from making any further rash mistakes, and helped him from Wulfgar's booming laughter to Craddock the healer, where his wrist was set and a sling was fashioned. When the time had come for Sigmar to earn his shield and ride out to do battle with the Greenskins, ravaging the southern territories of the Umberrigen, Trinovantes had made it clear that Geryon could not ride with them.
What use is a warrior who cannot hold on to his horse and bear a weapon?
Trinovantes had said gently, and Ravenna had been glad, for the thought of both her brothers riding off had worried her more than she cared to admit. Ravenna scanned the trees across the river as she made her way home, looking for a telltale glint of metal, but again she saw nothing. Early evening sunlight scattered bright reflections from the sluggish river as it meandered along the edge of the village, and, despite her worry, she could appreciate the beauty of the place. Since dawn, she and Geryon had been amongst those bringing in the summer harvest, him wielding the sickle with his good arm, and her with the basket upon her shoulders. It was hard, thankless work, but everyone had to take their turn in the fields, and she was grateful for Geryon's presence, despite his foul mood. Though he could not ride to war with the others, he could still wield a sickle and help in the fields. Now, the day's work was done, and she could look forward to resting for the evening and eating some hot food. The harvest had been plentiful, and thanks to the new pumps installed by Pendrag and the dwarf Alaric, many acres of land that had previously been thin and undernourished were now irrigated and fertile. The storehouses were full to bursting, and surplus grain left every week in wagons escorted by armoured warriors for the east to be traded with the dwarfs for weapons and armour, for no finer race of metalworkers existed than the mountain folk. Geryon caught up with her.
I'm sorry, Ravenna. I didn't mean to make you angry.
I'm not angry. I'm just tired and worried.
Trinovantes will be fine. He's a great warrior. Not as elegant a swordsman as I, but handy with an axe.
Worried for all of them. Trinavantes, Wolfgar, Hendrag.
And Sigmar?
Yes, for Sigmar too.
Honestly, sister, I don't know what you see in him. Just because he's a king's son doesn't make him special. He's like all the rest of them. Boorish and just one hot meal away from being a savage.
Hush.
What, afraid Wolfgart's going to come and break my other wrist? I'll gut him first.
Gideon!
Said Ravenna, hearing genuine venom in his voice. But before she could say more, she saw her brother's eyes fix on something behind her. She turned and followed his gaze across the river, her brother's harsh words forgotten in an instant. A column of horsemen was emerging from the trees, their pace weary but voices triumphant. Spears and banners were held high, and the warriors cheered at the sight of Reichdorf. Answering cries came from the settlement's walls, and the men and women of Reichdorf ran to the gates as word spread that the warriors had returned. Ravenna felt relieved laughter bubble up inside her, but it died in her breast as she saw a group of warriors in full battle armour leading the horsemen and carrying a litter of shields upon which was laid the body of a fallen hero.
Oh no. No. Please, by all the gods, no.
Ravenna's heart sank, as her first thought was that the fallen warrior was Sigmar. But then she saw that the king's son helped to carry the litter, and that his crimson banner was still held aloft. Her relief at Sigmar's survival was then crushed savagely and heartbreakingly as she recognised the emerald green banner that covered the dead warrior. Trinavantes' banner. The walls of Reichdorf loomed large ahead of them, stark and black against the faded ivory of the sky, and Sigmar looked forward to his return home as much as he feared it. He remembered the cheering folk of his home as they had seen the warriors off in glory, shields bright and spears shimmering in the sun. Now they were returning in glory, the green-skinned menace from the Grey Mountains defeated and its warlord slain. All told, they had burned just under 2,000 orcs and goblin corpses in great pyres, and by any normal measure, the victory had been magnificent. The chieftain of Astafan, a distant cousin of his father, had welcomed them within the town's walls following the battle, his people tending to Sigmar's wounded men and feeding the victorious warriors with the choicest meats and finest beers. Sigmar had joined with his men in celebrating the victory, but to stand apart from them in melancholy for the slain would have only insulted their courage. In his heart, however, he mourned the death of Trinavantes. He mourned him, and he felt the ache of guilt that his order had sent him to his death. Ahead, the land sloped down to the Suddenright Bridge, a grand construction of stone and timber that Alaric and Pendrag had designed and overseen the construction of barely 2 months ago. Sigmar and his fellow litter-bearers followed the course of the dusty road as it wound down the hill towards the bridge, each step measured and dignified as they brought the honoured dead home for the last time. The notched edges of the shields bearing his sword brother bit into his shoulder, but he welcomed the discomfort, knowing that the burden of Trinavantes' death would be his long after he put down the litter and his friend was interred within his tomb on the edge of the Breckenwalsh, up on the Warriors' Hill. The ground levelled out, and the litter-bearers passed between carved pillars topped with howling wolves that reared to either side of the bridge. Stone panels on the inner face of the bridge's parapet were carved with images of battle from the legends of his people, each one a heroic tale that had thrilled Umberrigan children for years. Heroes such as Redmane Dragor and his father battling orcs and dragons on the panels, and across, the image of Bjorn slaying a great bull-headed creature. Across from there was a blank panel where Sigmar's tale would begin. No doubt some graven image of his victory of Astafan would be rendered in stone, forever marking the birth of his legend. Sigmar watched as the heavy gates of Reichdorf swung outwards, hushed by groups of straining warriors. The walls of Reichdorf were taller than those of Astafan, encircling an area far larger and home to over 2,000 people. King Bjorn's city was one of the marvels of the land west of the mountains, but Sigmar already had plans to make it the greatest city in the world. The arch above the gate was formed from interlacing beams of timber, and at its apex stood a statue of a grim-faced and bearded warrior, swathed in armour and wolfskin, who bore a huge two-handed warhammer. A pair of wolves sat beside him, and Sigmar bowed his head before the image of Ulrich. His father stood in the centre of the open gateway, accompanied as always by Alfgeir and Eoforth. Sigmar felt intense joy at seeing him, knowing that no matter how far he travelled or how great his legend might become, he would always be his father's son, and grateful for the fact. Men and women of Reichdorf clustered around the gates, but none ventured from beyond the walls, for it was every warrior's right to march back through the gates of his home with his head held high.
A fine welcome indeed,
said Pendrag, marching beside Sigmar and also bearing the weight of Trinovantis' body.
As well as it bloody should be. The tribe hasn't seen a victory like this in decades.
As it should be.
Their steps shortened as the ground rose, and they climbed the slope towards the walls of Reichdorf. Sigmar felt his spirits rise as he saw the crowds arrayed to welcome them home, feeling a great surge of affection for his people. Through everything this world could throw at them on the road to Mor's kingdom, monsters, disease, hunger and hardship, they survived with dignity and with courage. What force could halt the progress of a race such as his? Yes, there was pain and despair, but the human spirit had vision and dreams of a greater destiny. Already the seeds of Sigmar's vision were bearing fruit, but no growth was achieved without pain. Sigmar knew there would be much hardship in the years ahead before he could realise the grand ambition that had filled him upon his dooming day amid the tombs of his ancestors. Sigmar led his warriors through the gates of Reichdorf, and roars of approval and joy swelled from hundreds of throats as their people welcomed them home. Parents rushed to greet their sons, with tears some shed to joy, others in sadness. Heartfelt welcomes and aching cries of loss filled the air as Umberrigan mothers found their sons either riding tall upon their horse or laid across them. Sigmar kept walking until he stood before his father, the king as regal and magnificent as ever, though his face spoke of the simple joy at seeing a son return from war alive and well.
Lower him gently.
And he and his sword brothers slit the shields from their shoulders and laid Trinovantis' body upon the ground. Sigmar stood before his father, unsure as to what he should say, but King Bjorn solved his dilemma for him, sweeping him up in a crushing bear hug and embracing him tightly.
My son,
said his father.
You return to me a man.
Sigmar returned his father's embrace, feeling his love for the brave man who had raised him without a wife at his side as a powerful force within him. Sigmar knew that he owed everything he was to the teachings of his father, and to have won his approval was the finest feeling in the world.
I told you I would make you proud.
Aye, that you did, my son. That you did.
The king of the Umberrigans released his son and stepped forward to address the warriors that had returned to his city, his arms raised in tribute.
Warriors of the Unberagen, you are returned safely to us, and for that I give thanks to Ulrich. Your valor will not go unrewarded, and every one of you dines like a king tonight.
The riders cheered, the sound reaching the clouds, and Bjorn turned to Sigmar and his fellow litter-bearers. He looked down at the banner.
Trinovantis?
Yes. He fell at Astafan Bridge.
Did he fight well? Was it a good death?
It was. Without his courage, the day would have been lost.
Then Ulrich will welcome him into his hold, and we shall envy him. For where Trinovantis is now, the beer is stronger, the food more plentiful, and the women more beautiful than any in this world. In time, we will see him again, and we will be proud to walk the halls of the mighty with him.
Sigmar smiled, knowing his father spoke truly, for there could be no greater reward for a true warrior than to be honoured with a good death, and then welcomed into the feast halls of the afterlife.
I had always believed that it was the loneliest thing to lead men into battle, but now I know that a father's loneliness as he waits for his son to return safely is far worse.
I think I understand.
Turning to look at distraught parents as they led away the horses that bore their dead sons.
For all its glory, war is a grim business.
Then you have learned a valuable lesson, my son. A victory is a day of joy and sadness in equal measure. Cherish the first, and learn to deal with the second, or you will never be a leader of men.
Bjorn turned to Sigmar's sword brothers.
Wolfgart, Pendrag, it fills my heart with joy to see you both return to us.
Wolfgart and Pendrag beamed at the king's praise as 3 wagons bearing barrels of beer rumbled along the road from the brewhouse stores. Alaric the dwarf rode in the lead wagon, and a mighty roar went up from the warriors as they recognised the angular runic script on the side of the barrels.
Dwarf ale?
Nothing but the best for our returning heroes. I had been keeping it for my son's wedding feast, but he seems determined to keep me waiting. Better to use it before it goes flat.
I heard that. Dwarf ale never goes flat.
Figure of speech. I meant no offense, Master Alaric.
Just as well. I can head back to my people any time, you know.
Stop being such a dour misery, Guts.
Laughed Pendrag, taking the dwarf's hand in a firm grip of friendship.
And get boring.
Wolfgart nodded to Sigmar, and the king quickly made his way to Pendrag and the beer barrels.
Not joining them?
I will, but I should wait with Trinaventus until his kin come for him.
Aye, right enough, but until they do, tell me of your adventures, and leave no detail untold.
There's not much to tell, really. We tracked the Greenskins south and west, and then routed them before the walls of Astathan.
Thousands.
Asked Alfgeir, with his customary lack of embellishment.
Around 2,000.
2,000?
Gasped Bjorn, exchanging a proud glance with Alfgeir.
Not much to tell, he says. And Bone Crusher?
Dead by my hand. Gal Moraz drank deep of his blood.
I had not dreamt such a number of greenskins could be gathered under one Lord. And you killed them all?
That we did. Their corpses are ashes in the mountains.
Ulric's blood. Then I hope Aethelm gave you a hero's welcome in his little town. I'll have words with him if he didn't.
He did. Your cousin sends greetings to his king, and swears to send what warriors he can spare should we ever need them.
Bjorn nodded.
He's a good man, is Aethelm. Takes after old Redmane.
Sigmar saw a warning look enter into his father's eyes and turned to see a girl with midnight dark hair walk stiffly through the gates of Reitdorf. His mouth suddenly felt dry as he recognised Ravenna, her long green dress, proud beauty, sending his stomach into a loop of unfamiliar feelings. Her face was lined with sadness, and Sigmar felt as though his heart would break at the sight of it. Her younger brother, Trinovantis' twin, followed her, tears of grief spilling down his pale skin. She walked towards her brother's banner-shrouded body and nodded to Sigmar and his father, before kneeling beside her dead sibling and placing her hand upon his chest. Geryon slumped beside her, wailing and shaking his head as great sobs racked his thin frame.
Be silent, boy. It's woman's work to weep for a fallen warrior.
Geryon looked up and his eyes locked with Sigmar's.
You killed him. You killed my brother!
Fires of the king's longhouse burned low, the peat and timbers smouldering, and the soporific heat had sent many a warrior to his bed. The revelries of victory had gone on long into the night, with offerings of choice meats and beer made to Ulrich and Mor, the first to be thanked for the courage the warriors had shown in battle, and the second to guide them to their rest. The longhouse was quiet, the sounds of perhaps 100 warriors as they slept, wrapped in their animal skins, and the creak of settling wood, all that disturbed the silence. Those warriors with families had returned to their homes, while those without wives, or too young to know their limit of beer, lay passed out face down on long trestle tables. As was customary on a night when fighting men returned home, the king and his heir watched over their warriors to honour their courage. Sigmar sat on a throne next to his father, a throne that had been carved by his father's hand in readiness for his coming of age, when he would sit beside the king as a man. A long wolfskin cloak hung from Sigmar's shoulders, and Galmaraz rested on a plinth created specially for the dwarf-crafted weapon. A small herd had been slaughtered for the feast, and when the dwarf ale had run out, the brewmaster's reserve had been brought out. Oaths of brotherhood had been renewed by veteran warriors, and new ones sworn by those who had earned their shields on the bloody field of Astafan. Sigmar had celebrated along with the warriors, but could not rid himself of the image of Ravenna's strained face and Gerion's weeping as they knelt beside the body of Trinovantes. He knew the Battle of Astafan had been an incredible victory, but it was soured for him by the death of his friend. Part of him knew that such thoughts were selfish, for did the deaths of those warriors he had not been sword brothers to not matter? Trinovantes had been a good and trusted friend, quiet and thoughtful in his counsel, but never less than honest and true. Where Wulfgar would advise violence and Pendrag diplomacy, Trinovantes' counsel often combined the best of both arguments. Not compromise, but balance. He would be sorely missed.
You are thinking of Trinovantes again.
Is it that obvious?
He was your sword brother. It is right that you should miss him. I remember when Thorfinn died in the Reich marshes. That was a sad day, so it was.
I think I remember him. The big man? You haven't talked of him much. What happened to him?
Ach, you were only a boy, and his death wasn't a tale for young ears. Yes, Thorfinn was a giant of a man. Bigger even than me, if you can believe that. Carved from oak he was, and strong as stone. He was the best sword brother a man could ask for. He died, as all men must.
How?
It was 4 or 5 summers ago, when he marched to war alongside King Marbed of the Endals. You remember?
Sigmar tried to recall the encounter, but his father had left Reichdorf to fight so many battles that it was hard to remember them all.
No? Well, Marbad's a good man, and his people were scratching a living on the edges of the marshes at the mouth of the river. They had settled there after King Marius of the Utens drove them from their homeland after the Teutogens had taken their land. I suppose it's possible to live there, but why anyone would want to, I don't know. The marshes are a dangerous place, full of sucking bogs, corpse lights, and demons that drink the blood of men.
Sigmar shivered despite the heat of the longhouse, remembering terrifying tales of dead-eyed things of pale skin and needle teeth that lurked in the haunted mists to feast on the unwary.
Anyway, Marbad and I go back a long way. We fought the orcs of the Bloodmore tribe that came over the Grey Mountains 20 years ago, and he saved my life, so I owed him a blood debt. When the mist demons of the marshes rose up to threaten his people, he called in that debt, and I marched out to fight alongside him.
You marched all the way to the coast?
Indeed we did, lad. For when an oath is sworn, you must never break it. Ever. Oaths of loyalty and friendship are all we have in this world, and the man who breaks a promise or whose word isn't worth anything has no place in it. Always remember that.
I will. What happened when you got to the coast?
Marbad and his army were waiting for us at Marburg, and we walked into the marshes as though it was some grand adventure. All us warriors out for glory and honor.
Sigmar saw his father's eyes take on a glassy, distant sheen, as though the mists he spoke of had risen up in his memories, and he once more walked that long-ago trodden path.
Father.
What? Oh, yes. Well, we set off into the marshes, and the mist demons rose up around us like ghosts. They took men down into the bogs, drowned them and sent them back to fight us, all bloated and white. I saw Thorfinn snatched by one of them. I'll never forget it. It was white. So white. So very white. Like a winter sky it was, with eyes of cold blue. like fires in the northern skies at winter. It looked at me and I swear it laughed at me as it took my sword brother to his death.
How did you defeat them?
Defeat them? I'm not sure we did, you know. It was all we could do to get out of the marshes alive. Marbad possessed a weapon crafted by the Fey folk, a blade of power he called Ulfshard. I don't know what manner of power was bound to it, but it could slay demons, and he wielded it like a true hero, cutting a path for us through the mists and slaying any demons that came near us. That wasn't the worst of it, though.
It wasn't?
No, not by a long way. Just as we got to the edge of the marsh, I heard someone calling my name, and I remember the joy I felt when I recognized it as Torfinn's voice. Then, there he was, walking out of the mist towards me, eyes rolled back into their sockets, skin all waxy and dead, and black water spilling out of his mouth as if his lungs were full of it.
What did you do?
What could I do? Marbad offered me Ulfshard, and I cut Torfinn down and sent him to Ulric's halls. Being drowned is no death for a warrior, so I killed him with a sword. And if there's even a shred of justice in the Wolf God, he'll let Torfinn in, because there was no truer man than he that walked this land.
Sigmar knew that his father would have had no choice but to kill his sword brother to allow him to enter Ulric's halls. The idea that he might one day have to fight one of his own sword brothers was anathema to him, and he decided there and then that he would gather those closest to him and make an oath of eternal brotherhood with them.
We left the marshes, I returned Ulfshard to Marbad, and we became sword brothers. That's why when we or the Endals call for aid, the other is oath-bound to answer. In the same way, the Sharusans and the Telutians are our sworn allies after the battles against the monstrous beastkin of the forests. It's all about oaths, Sigmar. Honor those you make, and others will follow your example.
Sigmar nodded in understanding. Ravenna closed the buttons of her brother's tunic and pulled the lacing tight, before smoothing the soft wool over his chest. Dressed in his finest clothes, Trinovantes lay on the cot bed he had risen from only a few days ago to ride to war. Since their mother and father were dead, it fell to her to wash his body and clean his hair in preparation for his interment in his tomb, upon the rise of the new moon the following night. She ran a hand along the side of his cold cheek, and though his fine dark hair, so like her own and Gerion's, his features had softened, but the lines of care and worry that had forever creased his handsome face remained imprinted upon him.
Even in death, you still look sad.
His axe lay on the bed next to him, its edges sharp and the blades gleaming in the firelight. She reached out to touch it, but pulled back her fingers at the last moment. It was a weapon of war, and she wanted nothing more to do with it. War was a fool's errand, a game to the warriors of Reitdorf, but a game that could have only one outcome. Gerion sat opposite her at the table, his head buried in curled arms as he wept for his lost twin. On her deathbed, Ravenna's mother had confided to her that when Trinovantes and Gerion were born, the hag woman who had birthed them said they would forever be connected to one another, but that only one would grow to know the greatest pleasure and the greatest pain. She had never spoken to this to Gerion, but wondered if the death of his twin brother was the greatest pain of which the hag woman had spoken. What then might be his greatest pleasure? Ravenna longed to take her brother in her arms and rock him to sleep, as she had done many times when they had been growing up and the older boys had teased him for his thin frame and beautiful face. That, however, was the impulse of an older sister, and he was beyond such simple remedies. She rose from her kneeling position beside the bed and crossed their low dwelling. Smoke from the fire gathered beneath the roof, since there was no vent, but the hot smoke kept the roof warm and dry. The smell of boiling meat from the king's herds rode from a bubbling pot hung on iron hooks above the fireplace, although she suspected that the meat would go to waste, for neither of them had much of an appetite. Ravenna reached out and placed her palm on her brother's head as she sat next to him. Ignoring her earlier thought, She slid her arm around him and drew him close to her. His arm slid naturally around her waist, and she gently rocked him back and forth.
Hush now. We'll have no more tears in this house, Garion. You'll attract evil spirits, and your brother does not want to go to old Ulrich's halls with the sorrow as the last thing he hears.
I can't help it. My brother is dead,
said Geryon, lifting his head from her shoulders. Tears and snot mingled on his upper lip and chin, and his eyes were bloodshot from crying. He wiped his free arm across his face.
Trinovantes was my brother too.
but he was my twin. You don't know what it's like to lose someone who's like a part of you. I could feel the same things he did, as though they happened to me.
Trinovantes was a warrior. He chose that life, and he knew the risks.
No, I don't think he did. I've asked around.
What does that mean?
It means that Sigmar caused his death. I spoke to the warriors who came back, and they told me that Sigmar sent Trinovantes to hold Astafen Bridge. He ordered him not to retreat, no matter what. What kind of a choice is that?
Ravenna slipped her arm from around her brother, taking him by the shoulder and turning him to face her. She too had desired to know how her brother had died, but she had asked Pendrag and knew the truth of the matter.
No, Garion. Trinovantes volunteered to hold the bridge. I asked Pendrag, and he told me what happened.
Pendrag? Well, of course he's going to back up his sword brother, isn't he? They've sworn an oath or something. He'd say anything to protect Sigmar.
Pendrag may be many things, but he is not a liar, and I believe him. A greenskin killed Trinovantes, and Sigmar slew the beast.
Geryon pulled away from his sister.
How can you defend him at a time like this? Is it because you want to spread your legs for him? Is that it?
Ravenna slapped him hard, her palm leaving a vivid imprint on his cheek.
So it's true.
And she drew back her arm to slap him again. His hand snapped out and caught her wrist in an iron grip.
Don't.
Ravenna pulled her arm free as Geryon stood, his hand balled into a fist, and the veins in his neck stark against his pale skin. Ravenna scrambled back, frightened of her brother's sudden fury.
I'm sorry I said that, sister. But you won't change my mind. Sigmar killed our brother, as surely as if he'd driven that spear through his heart.